Bruchim haboyim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Ayin Beis Amud Beis. Starting with Ayin Beis Amud Aleph at the new Mishnah. In regards to Erev Chatzeros, all the batim that share in that Chatzer must participate in the Erev Chatzeros. Our Mishnah discusses the conditions whereupon when the bayis is considered to be separate and independent, whereby they do not have to be included in the Erev Chatzeros. Says our Mishnah, Chamisha Chaburois Sheshavstu Betraklin Echod. There are 5 different Chaburois that are living in the same, call it traklin, the same hall or the same mansion that is separated, and each one has a different entrance, either to the Chatzer directly or through a prose door, a corridor to the Chatzer. It states over here, Beishamai oimrim eruv lekol chabur v'chabura. Each chabura in this hall has to give their own bread, their own pas to be included in Erev Chatzeros. Ubeis Hillel oimrim eruv echod lekulon. Beis Hillel argues and says one eruv suffices for all 5 chaburos, and therefore only one pas must be given to include them in the Erev Chatzeros. Umoidim bizman shemiktsoson shruyim bechadorim oy ba'aliyos shein tzrichos erev lekol chabura chabura. However, everybody agrees, even Beis Hillel, that if it's going to be a separate cheder, that means from the onset it was already separated as private walls and ceilings, or it was it was an upstairs, which was also a separate dwelling, then even Beis Hillel will agree that all of them have to give a separate pas in order to be included in the Erev Chatzeros. Says the Gemara Amar Rav Nachman, Machloikis b'mesipos. The Machloikis between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel is in regards to a partition of mesipos. Mesipos is wood, pieces of wood, planks of wood, that it makes a low partition between them. Then there's a Machloikis in Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that Beis Shammai says each one has to bring their own pas. Beis Hillel said that one pas is sufficient. Aval b'mechitza asara divra kol eruv lekol chabura v'chabura. But if they're proper mechitzas, halachic mechitzas of asar tfachim, then even Beis Hillel will agree that each one is a separate chabura that requires a separate pas to be included in Erev Chatzeros. Ika de Amrei. There's another version of Rav Nachman's statement. Omer Rav Nachman, af b'mesipas machlikis. Even in regards to mesipas, when you have this low type of partition, even there will be a machlokes in Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel again. Beis Shammai says that each one will have to give their separate pas, and Beis Hillel says no, one is sufficient. In addition to that, they're arguing even if it was going to be a partition, a mechitza, of a halachic mechitza of asar tfachim, even there they'll have the same machlokes. So we have 2 different versions of Rav Nachman's statement. The first version is the machlokes in our Mishnah between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai is a machlokes dafka if it's low partitions. Then we say that Beis Hillel holds that it's considered to be one entity. But if it's going to be asara tfachim, that's the partition, proper mechitza halachic wall, then even Beis Hillel will agree with Beis Shammai that you need each one a separate pas. The second version of Rav Nachman is saying that Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are arguing in both scenarios, whether it's a short partition or it's a proper halachic partition of asar tfachim. In both scenarios, Beis Shammai maintains that each chabur has to give their separate pas and be included in the Eruv Chatzeros, whereas Beis Hillel says that all of them are one entity and one pas is sufficient. Now the Gemara brings 2 different Amoroim to explain our Mishnah, the machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Pligi bo Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Shimon beRebbi. They argue about how to explain our Mishnah. Again, our Mishnah states, according to Beis Shammai, when you have 5 chaburos that are in this traklin, they have to give 5 different pas 5 different breads in order to then combine into the Erev Chatzeros. Beis Hillel says no. When you have 5 different chaburos in the traklin achas, then 1 is sufficient. Here, one explains as follows: Chadomar machloikes b'mechitzois hamagiyos letikro, aval mechitzos she'ein magiyos letikro divrei hakol eruv echad lekulan. He explains that if there are mechitzos, walls that go up all the way into the ceiling, then there's a machloikes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. But if the walls do not go up to the ceiling, then, even though they're proper walls of Asar Tfachim, then everybody would agree that 1 is sufficient. That means that even Beis Shammai would agree with Beis Hillel that 1 pas is sufficient for all 5 chaburos. Now this clearly goes against the first statement of Rav Nachman, because Rav Nachman stated over there that they are arguing when it comes to a mechitza v'asara. Here it states that mechitza v'asara, everybody agrees, including Beis Shammai, that it's one entity. V'chad Omar, a second way of explaining the Mishnah, according to these Tanoi, according to these Amoroim, is as follows: Machloikis b'mechitzois she'ein magios l'tikro. The machloikis between them, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, is when it's a wall, a halachic wall, but does not come up to the tikra, to the roof, to the ceiling. That's when there's a machloikis between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, whether you say it's one entity or it's 5 different entities. Aval mechitza magios l'tikro divrei hakol tzrichin eruv lekol chabur v'chabura. But if it indeed goes up all the way to the ceiling, even Beis Hillel will agree with Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel goes with Beis Shammai that each chabura has to give a separate pas. So it comes out that we have 4 different explanations of our Mishnah. We have Rav Nachman's first statement that stated that their machloikis is in a wall that is short, a short wall, not even asar tfachim. That's where the machloikis lies. Then we have a second statement of Nachman, a second version rather of Rav Nachman's statement, that they're not only arguing in that scenario when it's a short wall, but they're even arguing a wall that has asara tfachim. Then we have a third explanation of our Mishnah that states they're arguing when the wall goes up to the tikra. But when it does not go up to the tikra, then there's a machlokes, Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel. And then we have a fourth version that says when and they arguing? They're arguing when it does not go up to the tikra, but if it goes up to the tikra, everybody agrees that they're considered to be separate chaburos. Each one has to give a separate pas. When on top of Daf Ayin Beis Amud Beis, ask the Gemara from the following brisa to then ask on this interpretation of the Mishnah. Omar Rabbi Yehuda Hasabar. Rabbi Yehuda Hasabar, the one who was a great thinker, he said the following: Lo nechleku Beis Shammai u Beis Hillel al mechitzois hamagiyos letikro shetzrichin eruv lekol chabur v'chabura. Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are not arguing in a scenario when the mechitza goes up all the way into the ceiling. That they don't argue. That even Beis Hillel will agree that indeed you have to go ahead and make a separate pas to be included for each chabura. Al ma nechleku, what is the machlokes Beis Shammai Beis Hillel? Says Rabbi Yehuda Hasabar in this brisa, al mechitzo she'ein magiyos letikro, when there are proper mechitzos, but they don't arrive, they don't get to the ceiling. Beis Shammai oimrim eruv lekol chabura v'chabura, uBeis Hillel oimrim eruv echel lekulam. That's where they have the machlokes in our Mishnah. So this brisa really is exactly like the second way we explained just before. In other words, the fourth of the 4 different ways of explaining the brisa of the Mishnah. And therefore, the Gemara speaks out how this brisa will then go with the previous explanations of our Mishnah. Says the Gemara, to contrast, Leman di Omar mechitzois hamagiyos letikro machlokes. According to that opinion that stated earlier, that we'll call it the third opinion that we said, that the Mishnah is talking about a machlokes in mechitzas that are megiya letikra, There's a machlokes when it comes up all the way to the ceiling. So then tiyufta, this brisa is going to be a refutation on that, because this brisa states that when it comes up all the way to the tikra, there everybody agrees that it's considered to be a separate chabura. And the opinion explains our mission to be when the wall does not arrive, doesn't get all the way to the ceiling. There's a machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. So then, siyata, this brisa is our support for that explanation of the Mishnah, because this brisa also says there's a machlekes when the wall doesn't arrive to the ceiling. It's only a machlekes. Sorry, there's a machlokes when it does not arrive to the ceiling. It's only not a machlokes when it arrives to the ceiling. So that's going to support that explanation of the Mishnah. Lahach lishna. Now we go to Rav Nachman's statements. Lahach lishna da Omar Rav Nachman machloizim b'mesipos. According to the first version of Rav Nachman that says Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel are arguing when it's a short wall, then they have a machlokes tiyufta. Then clearly this brisa is going to be then a refutation according to that explanation of Rav Nachman's first statement, the one that we explained in the original way. Because our brisa clearly states that when it comes to a wall, so when there's a wall, there's a machlekes that does not arrive to the tikra. When it arrives to the tikra, everybody agrees. That statement of Rav Nachman, however, said that there's a machlekes when it comes to a short wall, what we call mesipos. But if it was asara tvachim, even if it was not arrived to the tikra, then everybody would agree that indeed it's considered to be one entity. So that's clearly not going to go together with that understanding. Elo lahach lishna dom Rav Nachman af mesipos machlekes. But the second version of Nachman, the Rav Nachman's second version said there's a machlokes even in a short wall between Beis Shammai and Hillel, which means there's also a machlokes when it's asar tfachim. Then the Gemara says, Lema to have a tiyufta. Should we say that there's also a tiyufta from this brisa? You know, it's not necessary to say there's a machlokes. Perhaps there's no machlokes. Granted, our brisa says there's a machlokes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel in a halachic wall that is asar tfachim, that does not arrive to the tikra. But maybe they also would say, which the Brisa doesn't explain, doesn't speak out, but maybe there would also be a machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai when it's a short wall too. We don't see from the Brisa necessarily that that's not going to be true. Omar Rav Nachman will then say, according to his second version, Pligi b'mechitza v'huadim mesipos. You can say that this brisa is not going to be a tiyufta, a refutation, because this brisa is talking about the same thing. They're arguing about where the wall is a halachic wall, but they would also argue about if it was less than a sarat tvachim, it was a mesipos. V'haide kol miflegi b'mechitza lo diacha koichan de Beis Hillel. And that's what explains in the brisa the machlokes, specifically in a scenario where it's asar tfachim, is only to show you the strength of Beis Hillel's argument. That Beis Hillel says, nonetheless, it'll also can be considered to be one entity. But certainly, if it was a short wall, certainly it would be one entity. I asked the Gemara, "Veliflug b'mesipas lo diacha koichan de Beis Shammai." Why not then say that the machlokes should be stated in the brisa of a machlokes of less than asar tfachim? That even there, Beis Shammai states that each one is a separate chabura and each one has to give a separate pass, and show the strength of Beis Shammai's argument. Answers the Gemara, koyach de heitera adif. When it comes to giving a heter, the strength of giving a heter is preferable. Why? Because one who's giving a heter must feel confident in the halacha, whereas to give a chumrah, to say that it is aser, that's easier, because one can just say something is aser, even if he's not so sure. So therefore it's preferable to give the strength of Beis Hillel's argument, who's more mekil, in this brisa. So it comes out that really the second statement of Rav Nachman's, the version of Rav Nachman, is not going to be refuted by this brisa. You can explain that the brisa is also going along with the statement of Rav Nachman. In fact, the Gemara says now, Omar Rav Nachman, Omar Rav, that Rav Nachman says the name of Rav, Halakha Rabbi Yehuda Hasabar. The halakha is like this brisa, which would go in line with the second version of Rav Nachman also. That once again, there's a machlokes Beis Hillel Beis Shammai, both in the case of Mesipos, when it's a low wall, as well as a Asar Tfachim wall too, so long as it does not reach the Tikra. But once it reaches the Tikra, then everybody would agree that you'd have to then give a separate pass for each one, even Beis Hillel. You can also medayik this explanation. The halach is like Rabbi Yehuda Sabar, like this brisa, from our Mishnah. Diktoni, it states, Umoidim bizman shemiktzos and shvuim bechab dorim uba'aliyos shetzrichin eruv lekol chabura v'chabura. The states in the Mishnah, even Beis Hillel will agree that if it was walled rooms to begin with, or it was a separate upstairs, even Rabbi Beis Hillel would agree that each chabur will have to then give a separate pass. My chadorim, my aliyos. He asks, what is it talking about in the Mishnah by saying chadorim and aliyos? Harei ilem chadorim v'chadorim mamish v'aliyos mamish pshita. If you're going to say the regular rooms that are already separated from the onset, it's a separate second story of a loft, which is separate dwelling. Certainly, that's pashit that they would have to then give a separate pass to be included in the Erev Chatzeros. Ella lav ke'ein chadorim u ke'ein aliyos. Are we not talking about something that's similar, that's like chadorim and like aliyos? Umayniu mechitzois hamagios letikra. Those walls that are going up to the ceiling, they will be like that. Shma mina. That's where Beis Hillel will agree that when they're going to be going up to the walls, then it will be already a separate entity. And even Beis Hillel will say that each one has to give a separate pass. The Gemara now brings a different explanation between the machlokes Beis Shammai, Beis Hillel, and Mishnah. Until now, we've been discussing Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai are arguing in regards to then the separation, the partitions of these chamisha chaburos in this great tracklin, whether it's considered to be one entity or 5 separate entities. Now the Gemara gives a whole different explanation of Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. Nothing to do with partitions. The machlokes has to do with, indeed, is it considered to be one entity in regards to then bringing the Eruv to another house in the Chatzar or not? Explains the Gemara. Tana, Bamed Devarim Amurim. What is it that we're speaking about in the Mishnah, the machlokes in Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel? Kishemolichin es Eruvon lemokom acher. When they take their Eruv, granted they're one single entity right now, but when they take their Eruv now to bring it to another house in the Chatzar, to enjoin an Erev Chatzeros, so then there's a machlokes. On that, that's when Beis Shammai says each one has to bring a separate pass. Aval im haya eruvon ba etzlon, but if an eruv was brought to them from the other batim, was put into this traklin, divrei hakol eruv echol lekulon. Even Beis Shammai would agree that you wouldn't have to then put any additional eruv whatsoever. In other words, they don't have to then put, since it's being put in their traklin, and since it's considered to be one entity, these 5 joined together considered to be one traklin. So therefore, when an Eruv is put in their house, then nothing has to be done. So again, Beis Shammai is of the opinion that it's only when they take this one entity, these 5 chaburos of one traklin, when they take the Eruv to another house in the Chatzar to enjoin an Erev Chatzeros, then Beis Shammai would say each one has to then give his own pass. But if all of the batim bring their pass to this traklin, granted there's 5 different chaburos, but nonetheless we consider it to be one entity in regards to then the Erev Chatzeros, whereby nobody has to then put in the pass, it's in their traklin. Now, there's a separate thing, a separate opinion of Beis Shammai in a scenario that is if this traklin was now considered to be part of an entity. They now were considered to be now enjoined as one entity, and now they want to then enjoin a separate chotzer to make Erev Chatzeros with a different chotzer. When they put their pass into another chotzer to enjoin the two chatzeros, so according to Beis Shammai, each chabur has to give a separate pass. Just like we said, regard to then an eruv within itself into another house of that chotzer, they'd have to give a separate pass. Beis Hillel is chalik on both counts. Beis Hillel says not only when they make an eruv chatzeros within that chotzer, and they put the eruv in another house, Beis Hillel says one pass is sufficient between the five chaburos. But even if they're going to then enjoin in another chotzer, they're going to then combine their chotzer with another chotzer to be able to metalta from chotzer to chotzer. There too, Beis Hillel argues and says one pass is sufficient from these five chaburos that's coming from one traklin, and therefore says the Gemara. Kiman azloha, like who goes like the following brisa? The Tanya, the brisa states, Chamisha shegavu es Eruvin, when 5 in one chotzer, 5 different houses collect their eruv, they get passed from each house. And now they're considered to be one combined chotzer to be have an eruv chatzeros within that chotzer. Kishemolichin es eruv in the makom acher. If they bring their eruv to another chotzer to enjoin into another chotzer, to allow carrying from one chotzer to the other, eruv echad lekulon, one is sufficient to be put into the other chotzer. That means one pass of these 5 is sufficient to be put into the other chotzers to enjoin the two. Keman, like who does this go? Beis Hillel. This is Shita Beis Hillel. So again, we explained there's 2 machlokes in Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, that this traklon that we're talking about, we say in regards to this traklon that since there are 5 different chaburos, if they want to enjoin in a erev chatzeros within their chatzer, Beis Shammai says if it's brought to another house, each one has to then donate, each one has to give their own pass. Beis Hillel says no, one pass is sufficient. But even Beis Hillel agrees that if they would bring their eruv to the traklin, then you wouldn't have to do anything, that's sufficient. They are all considered to be one entity. In regards to then joining 2 chatzeros, this traklin, or in general, if you have a situation where the chotzer itself wants to enjoin in another chotzer, so they took 5 different erev chatzeros, and they put into their one erev chatzer. Now you have one erev chatzeros, and now they want to enjoin to another erev chatzeros. So they want to put their erev into the second chotzer. According to Beis Shammai, that each one have to put their own pass. According to Beis Hillel, only one has to put pass into the other chotzer. Now, says the Gemara, a different version, there are those that say, in what was our Mishnah talking about? The Machlokes Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, Kishahaya Eruv ba etzlon, when the Eruv would come to them. Here we're saying that Beis Hillel would say that it's considered to be one entity. However, aval im hayu molichin es Eruvin l'makom acher, but if they would bring their eruv to another house in the chotzer, divrei hakol tzrichin eruv lekol chabur v'chaburo, then even Beis Hillel would agree that each chabur would have to then give his own pass to then enjoin in the erev chatzeros. That's in regards to their own erev chatzeros. But it would come out also that if they would bring, let's say, would make a chotzer to combine with another chotzer, then it would come out here as well that Beis Hillel would require that each one would give his own pass. So again, in the scenario where here we already have an Erev Chatzeros, 5 people then join the Erev Chatzeros in this Chatzer, and now they want to join in a second Chatzer, then even Beis Hillel will agree with Beis Shammai that they would have to then go ahead and give pass, they would have to put their own pass separately into the second Chatzer. And therefore 5 different pass has to be put in that other chotzer. Kiman azlo ha, asked the Gemara, who goes like the following brisa? The Tanya chamisha shegavu es eruvon kishemolichin es eruvon l'makom acher eruv echad lekulon. Who says like the brisa that said when you have 5 that gather together in one chutzner to make an Erev Chatzeros, and now they want to enjoin in a second chutzner, that you can just take one pas from them and put into the other chutzner. Who would go like that? According to this version, Keman delo kechad, not like Beis Shammai, and even not like Beis Hillel. So it comes out over here, these are the separate types of understandings of the brises, right, of the two versions over here. According to the first version, Beis Hillel says no, he argues on Beis Shammai in both counts. And according to the second version, right, both counts meaning in terms of the into the Erev Chatzeros, you'd have to make the Erev Chatzero by each one of the traklin. According to Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai rather give each one a pass. According to Beis Hillel, one pass for all of them. And also they're arguing when you make two different Chatzeros. According to Beis Shammai, again, the same thing. Each one will have to give a separate pass to the second Chatzer. According to Beis Hillel, one pass is sufficient. But according to the second version, in the second version we see differently. In the second version, it comes out that when regards to the bias, that the bias that is making, that is being brought into the traklin, over there's a machlekes. Beis Shammai, there it says each chabura has to then participate in that Erev Chatzeros. That means to say, except for the one that the pas is put into his room in the traklin. Otherwise, each one has to then put his own bread. Beis Hillel says no. Beis Hillel says that they're combined into one entity, and therefore, if other houses are putting their Eruv in that traklin, that's sufficient. But, however, will they argue? In regards to then Chatzeros, in Chatzeros, when they already have, let's say, 5 people who gather together, 5 different Chatzeros, 5 different batim in one Chatzer, now they want to enjoin in a separate Chatzer. According to Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, each one would have to put a separate pass into the other Chatzer in order to enjoin into 2 Chatzeros.